The wind howled through the broken trees as smoke rose from the burned-out ruins of the alien outpost. Jack Rayner, a human soldier in black armor, moved slowly, his boots crunching on broken glass and alien bones. His rifle was heavy, but his eyes were sharp. Scanning every shadow, every corner, his unit had scattered after the ambush. And now he was alone, trapped deep in enemy territory. His radio crackled, but all he heard was static. The last thing his commander said was, "Regroup at Point Sigma." That was 2 hours ago, and now the silence felt louder than any gunshot. Jack turned a corner and froze. There, lying behind a half-destroyed wall, was a young alien girl. Her skin was soft blue, her eyes large and glowing, and blood ran down her arm. She was no more than 19 in human years, and her body trembled with fear. Their eyes met, and time stopped. She didn't scream, didn't run. She just looked at him with wide, wet eyes. Jack raised his rifle slowly, but something inside him felt wrong. "This girl wasn't a threat, are you? Hurt?" Jack asked softly, knowing she wouldn't understand. The girl winced and held her arm tighter. She tried to push herself up, but her leg gave out. She collapsed again, biting her lip to stop herself from crying. Jack stepped closer, weapons still raised. He should leave her. That's what the protocol said. Enemy species do not assist, but as he looked at her bleeding and shaking, something inside him cracked. A sudden sharp whistle cut through the air. A laser shot blasted the wall behind him, spraying hot shards. Jack dove forward and tackled the alien girl to the ground, shielding her with his body. More blasts followed, red and white bolts of death flying from the far ridge. "Stay down," he yelled. Even though she couldn't understand, pain shot through his back. He'd been hit. His armor had absorbed most of it, but he knew the next shot could kill. Still, he didn't move, didn't leave her. The attackers were coming closer now, their footsteps echoing through the ruined outpost. Jack's heart pounded, and his breathing grew shallow. He reached for a smoke grenade and rolled it into the open. A cloud of thick gray smoke rose, giving him just a few seconds with trembling arms. He pulled the girl up and dragged her into a collapsed building. He gritted his teeth as pain flared in his shoulder. Another hit. She cried out softly, trying to hold him as he collapsed behind a steel beam. He looked at her, blood running down his mouth, and said, "Go. Run." But she didn't run. Instead, she pressed her small hand to his wound and began whispering something in her language. Her voice was soft, shaking, but full of something hope. She tore a strip from her own clothing and wrapped it tightly around his arm. Jack's vision blurred, but he saw her face clearly. She was scared. But not for herself, for him. That moment changed everything. She was supposed to be the enemy, but now she was something else. He smiled weakly and closed his eyes. "I'm such an idiot," he whispered. Then everything went dark. Far above them, the attackers moved past. The smoke had confused their scanners, and they didn't check the wreckage. The girl stayed still, covering Jack's body with hers. Oh, she waited, silent and scared. Until the danger passed, only then did she move with all her strength. She dragged Jack deeper into the ruins. She didn't know his name, didn't even know if he'd survive. But she owed him her life and she wasn't going to let him die. As night fell, the alien girl sat beside the unconscious human. She looked at the stars above, then at his pale face. Her people had always said humans were cruel, cold, and dangerous. But this one took laser blasts to protect her. She reached out and gently touched his face. A single word escaped her lips, soft and full of feeling. "Thank you." The sky above was dark and cold when Jack opened his eyes again. His body ached, and the world spun slowly around him. He wasn't in the same place anymore. He was inside something that looked like a cave, but there were strange glowing crystals. On the walls, he tried to sit up, but his shoulders screamed in pain. His hand touched the bandage. There it was, tight. Clean, and not from any human medkit. Someone had taken care of him, and then he saw her. The alien girl was sitting near a small fire, her back straight, her face calm, her eyes lifted when he moved, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. There was no fear in her eyes now, only quiet curiosity. Jack blinked, unsure of what to say. She stood and walked over to him slowly. Her clothes were torn, and her skin was bruised, but she was alive. She pointed at his chest, then her own heart, and tapped twice. Jack didn't understand. But her eyes were soft, like she was thanking him again. He gave her a small nod and tried to speak. "Why did you bring me here?" His voice was weak, dry. The girl tilted her head, not understanding. She crouched beside him and opened a small satchel. Inside were a few pieces of dried food and a cup of glowing blue water. She offered them to him without a word. Jack hesitated for a second, then took the cup and drank. It was sweet, cool, and made his head feel clearer. The girl smiled, just a little, and returned to her spot near the fire. Jack leaned back and stared at the ceiling of the cave. Everything was upside down. He was supposed to kill her or leave her to die. Instead, he took 2 laser blasts, nearly died, and now? She had saved him. She was supposed to hate him. But she was nursing him back to life. Time passed slowly. Days, maybe. They couldn't speak much. But little by little, they understood each other through hands, eyes, and small gestures. Jack learned her Namiari. She would draw pictures in the dirt to explain things. When he pointed at himself and said Jack, she repeated it back, awkward but clear. Liari started saying simple words like food, hurt, and safe. Jack helped her too, teaching her human words in return. They were still hiding, still hunted by both sides. Every night they heard distant gunfire or the low rumble of alien patrol ships flying overhead, but inside the cave it felt like the war was far away. It felt like peace, even if only for a moment. One night, Jack woke to find Liari shaking. Her body was cold and her eyes were full of fear. She was having a nightmare, whispering in her language. He reached out, gently took her hand, and she froze. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes met his, and she didn't pull away. She held onto his hand and slowly leaned against him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need words. Not anymore. Jack knew what this meant. He had crossed a line. This wasn't just survival. He cared about her. More than he should. The next morning, Liari brought him something new. A broken alien device. Still glowing faintly, she tapped it, and a small hologram flickered to life, showed a map. Jack recognized part of the terrain was near the neutral zone. She wanted to take him there. A place where humans and aliens didn't shoot each other on sight. A place where, maybe, they could be free, but it wouldn't be easy, and they both knew it. Jack tightened the straps on his armor. Ignoring the pain, Liari helped him stand. And for the first time, they walked side by side into the wild. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something new, something dangerous, something beautiful, and behind them, in the shadows, a small drone blinked silently, watching, recording. They didn't know yet, but the world was about to change. Jack and Liari moved quietly through the dense alien forest. Each step was careful, slow, and silent. Strange glowing plants lit their path, pulsing with blue light. The deeper they went, the more dangerous everything felt. They were no longer just hiding from enemies. Now they were crossing into wild zones territories unclaimed by either humans or aliens. The map from the hologram showed a path to the neutral zone, but it wasn't a straight one. They had to cross broken land, alien beasts, and old battlegrounds full of traps. Jack's shoulder still hurt, but he didn't complain. Liari checked it every night, her fingers light and warm. She had stopped flinching from his touch. and Jack had stopped seeing her as the enemy. Now, she was his partner, and maybe something more. They didn't speak much, but silence was no longer awkward. When they heard ships in the sky, they hid together beneath thick roots or behind old machines. Sometimes Liari would rest her head on his chest. Listening to his heartbeat, Jack never pushed her away. One morning, the ground shook. A low growl echoed through the trees. Liari froze, eyes wide with fear. Jack looked around and spotted an old war mech, walking alone on auto-defense mode. The mech scanned the forest with red eyes. It was blind. 2 species attacked anything that moved. Jack grabbed Liari's hand and pulled her down into a ditch. The ground was cold and wet, but it hit them well. The mech stopped nearby. Turning its heavy weapons slowly, Jack held his breath, one arm over Liari to keep her still. Her fingers dug into his armor as the machine passed just inches away. They didn't move until the sound faded into the distance. When they finally got up, Liari's lips trembled. She touched Jack's cheek and said one soft word. "Safe." Jack smiled, wiped dirt from her face, and nodded. "Yeah, for now," he whispered. By the 3rd night, they reached a ruined human outpost. Jack remembered it from training reports. It was once a safe zone. Now burned and abandoned, they found shelter inside a broken tower. It still had power, but barely. Jack worked to repair the signal, hoping to reach someone in the neutral zone. While he did, Liari explored the dark rooms. She found pictures, ones showing humans and aliens shaking hands. She stared at them for a long time, touching the faded faces. Later, Jack heard footsteps and spun around. Rifle ready, but it was Liari holding one of the photos. Her eyes serious, she pointed to it, then pointed to them both. Jack understood what she meant. "It was real once," he said. "Peace." She nodded slowly, then said, "Again." That one word stayed with Jack all night. The next morning, the tower flash signal found. Jack quickly sent a message, using old neutral codes. He didn't know if anyone would answer, but it was their only chance. Liari watched nervously as the device blinked, waiting for a reply. They didn't know someone was already watching. The small drone that had followed them earlier had transmitted everything. Far away, in a hidden command center, 2 screens lit. Up one showed Jack, the other showed Liar. Military officers from both sides were staring at them in silence. A human general stood slowly, his face unreadable. He said one word to his assistant. "Find them." An alien commander nodded at the same time and whispered something in her language. The hunt had begun again. But this time, it wasn't just about war. It was about what Jack and Liar represented. Something dangerous, something powerful. Something that could end the war, break both empires forever. And deep in the forest, unaware of the storm coming, Jack and Liar sat beside a quiet fire. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move. Together, they watched the stars, not knowing that every peaceful second was about to disappear. The wind picked up again, colder this time. Leaves danced around their campfire as Jack sat with his rifle across his lap. He couldn't sleep. Not tonight. Something was wrong. He felt it in his bones. Liari was sleeping beside him, curled in 2. A blanket they had found in the ruins. Her breathing was soft and slow, peaceful. Jack didn't want to wake her, but his instincts kept warning him. He stood up and climbed the broken stairwell of the tower. From the top, he could see far beyond the forest. Lights moving slowly in the distance, not stars, drones. They had been found. Jack climbed back, down fast, his boots hitting stone and metal. He shook Liari gently, and her eyes opened at once. She saw his face and sat up quickly. "Alert, we have to go," Jack whispered. Liari nodded without asking why. She packed fast, already sensing Danger! The small device from earlier beep, someone had answered their message. Jack looked at the signal, a reply in old peace code. Neutral zone secured. 1 day's walk north, but there was another message under its scrambled military code. They were being tracked. Jack crushed the device under his boot. Liari flinched, but didn't ask. He grabbed her hand and they ran into the woods. Behind them, the last piece of tech sparked and died. The forest at night was alive with strange sounds. Glowing insects hovered above them, lighting their path. But something bigger was following them, quiet, steady, hunting. Jack stopped and pulled Liari behind a thick tree. He raised his rifle. Waiting, a shadow moved, slow and low. Then it stepped into the lightened alien warrior, full armor, eyes burning red. It raised its weapon, but Jack was faster. One shot, clean and silent. The alien dropped without a sound. Jack grabbed Liari again. And they kept moving. But now she knew this was no longer escape. This was war. They reached the edge of a deep valley by sunrise. It was wide, rocky, and filled with mist. Below, hidden under vines and rubble, was an ancient shipwreck. Not human, not aliens, something forgotten. Liari stared at it in awe. She pointed to symbols on the side, her language, and part of Jack's too. How? She whispered, her voice shaking. Jack had no answer, only questions. They entered the ship through a broken hatch. Inside, lights still flickered weakly. The walls were covered in carving stories of peace between species working together. Surviving together, it wasn't just a ship. It was a memory buried in time. Liari touched one of the carvings and turned to Jack. She didn't say a word, but he could see the question in her eyes. Can we be like them again? He nodded slowly, his hand reaching for hers, but peace didn't last long. A sharp hum filled the air. They turned just in time to see a human dropship descending above the valley. Troops were already rappelling down, armored and armed. Jack looked at Liari, his heart racing. They found us, he said. She grabbed his hand tightly. Fear clear on her face. This time, running wouldn't be enough. They had a choice: surrender or stand their ground. Jack checked his ammo. Almost empty. Liari pulled out a small energy. Blade trembling but ready. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were survivors. Defenders of something more. Outside, boots hit the ground, weapons raised. A voice shouted through a speaker, "Surrender the alien, and you won't be harmed." Jack stepped in front of Liari, rage in his eyes. Not happening. He said under his breath. The air grew tense. The silence before a storm. Liari stepped. Beside him, no longer hiding behind him. For the first time, they stood together, side by side. If this was the end, they would face it together. But something unexpected happened. From the trees above, another figure dropped down, an alien soldier. But different. He raised his weapon at the humans, then turned to Liari and nodded. Jack's eyes widened in another defector. More shadows moved, alien and human alike, coming from both sides. They weren't enemies anymore. They had seen the same recordings from the ancient ship. They had heard the same signal. And now? The world was starting to shift. One choice. One act of protection had set something greater in motion as the sun rose over the valley. The battle didn't begin. Instead, there was silence, as both sides stared at the impossible peace born in the fire of war. The silence didn't last. A single gunshot echoed across the valley. Not from Jack, not from Liari, but from a soldier on the ridge. Too nervous, too fast. The bullet hit a rock near Jack's feet, and everything shattered. Chaos broke out. Lasers. Fired shouts rang in every direction, but something strange happened. The alien soldier who had dropped down earlier didn't fight Jack. Instead, he covered Liari, blocking fire from her side. Jack fired warning shots into the air, not at anyone, just to make them stop, "Stop shooting." He shouted, his voice cracking. No one listened, not yet. Liari screamed something in her language. It was loud, clear, and full of command. The alien soldiers froze for a moment. Even the humans paused, confused. She stepped forward, arms raised. A bright beam of sunlight hit her face as she stood tall in the open. Jack's heart pounded. Anyone could shoot her right now. But no one did. Liari pointed at the broken ship behind them. Then she touched her own heart, and then Jack's. People watched in silence. Some lowered their weapons, unsure. A voice crackled on the human comms. "This is Commander Voss. Hold your fire." An armored man stepped out of the dropship. His eyes locked on Jack. "You disobeyed orders, Raynor," he said coldly. Jack stepped forward. Still between Liari and the soldiers, "I protected an innocent," he said. "She's not the enemy." Voss's eyes narrowed. "You don't get." "To decide that," he replied. Jack shook his head. "Then, who does?" he asked. The wind carried his words through the tense air. More soldiers arrived, both alien and human. But none fired. They surrounded the wreck site, unsure what to do. Jack looked at Liari. She looked back at him and nodded. They walked together. To the center of the valley, he raised his arms, slowly. "I'm not surrendering," he said, loud and clear, "but I'm not fighting either." Liari followed his movements, raising her hands too. It was a message clear, simple, peaceful. Some soldiers looked away, unsure how to react. Others lowered their weapons slowly. Commander Voss stepped closer. "What is this?" he asked. Jack pointed to the ancient ship. "This place. It's a message from before the war." Liari spoke softly. She said the word peace in both her language and Jack's. People heard it, and it stayed in their minds. Over the ridge, more commanders arrived, watching from afar. They couldn't deny what they were seeing. Two enemies protecting each other. Standing in front of a forgotten truth, some wanted to silence it, but others began to hope. Suddenly, the sound of another dropship roared in the sky. But this one carried a white flag, the symbol of the neutral zone. It landed softly near the ruins, and a woman stepped out. Dressed in silver robes, she looked at Jack and Liari, then around at both sides. "No more killing," she said. Her voice was calm, but strong. "We've watched long enough." She walked to them and held out her hands. "You two started something the rest of us were too afraid to try." Jack looked at Liari. She gave him a tiny smile, eyes shining. With emotion, it wasn't over yet. Not by far, but something had shifted now. They weren't just fugitives or soldiers. They were symbols. Jack reached for Liari's hand, and she held it tight. Behind them, the sun rose higher, bathing the valley in gold. What they had built in fear and silence was now out in the open, and the world was watching. Jack and Liari were taken to the neutral zone under armed escort. Not as prisoners, not as heroes, but as something in between. Their hands were never tied. But every eye watched them closely. They rode together in silence, the hum of the hover. Transport filling the air, Liari leaned her head against the window. Watching the land pass by, her fingers were still gently wrapped around Jack's. He never let go. Inside the base, humans and aliens worked side by side. It was strange to see, but also beautiful. Peace was still fragile here, like glass that could crack at any moment. The leaders didn't trust each other, but they watched. Waiting, Jack and Liari were called into a large council chamber. It was cold, full of stone and glass, with a long table in the center. At one end sat 3 humans in uniform. At the other, 3 aliens in robes and armor. Everyone looked at them as they entered. Jack stood tall, but inside he was tense. Liari walked beside him, calm and quiet. They stopped in the middle of the room and waited. "You are Jack Raynor, human soldier, one of the human leaders." Said yes. Jack replied. "And you are Liari of House Khitan," the alien leader said next. Liari gave a small bow, eyes focused. "You both broke rules," the human leader said. "You both disobeyed direct orders," the alien added. Jack clenched his jaw, but stayed silent. Liari looked down for a moment, then raised her eyes again. "But you also saved each other," a woman from the Neutral Council said. "You protected life, not just your own." She stood and looked around the table. "Maybe that's what we need more of." There was silence, heavy and thick. Then the human general spoke again. "Tell us, Jack, why did you do it?" Jack looked around, then at Liar. "She was scared, unarmed, bleeding," he said. "She wasn't the enemy, she was just someone who needed help." Liar stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "He risked his life," she said. "He saw me." As a person, those words landed heavy in the room. No one spoke for a while. Finally, the neutral leader stepped closer. "We can't change the past," she said, "but we can decide what happens next." She looked at both sides of the table. "Let them go," she said. "Not back to the war, but forward to something better." The human general frowned. "She's still an alien," he said, "and he's still one of ours," the alien commander added. "They don't belong together." Jack stepped forward, voice firm. "We do now," he said. Liari moved beside him, her voice matching his. "War didn't make us enemies," she said, "but peace made us family." The room fell quiet again. Then, slowly, the Neutral Council leader nodded. "You'll stay here, both of you," she said. "You'll speak, meet others, show them what's possible." Liari reached for Jack's hand again. He held it without hesitation. They weren't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for now, they had a chance, outside. The sun was setting behind the tall silver walls of the neutral zone. Jack and Liari walked together toward their new quarters. They didn't say much, but every step felt lighter. For the first time, they weren't running. They were walking toward something new, something risky. But maybe, just maybe, something worth it. News of Jack and Liari's story spread faster than anyone expected. First, it reached the border units. Then, it made its way into command rooms, briefing halls, and secret transmissions across both alien and human territories. Some called it betrayal, others called it hope. Inside the neutral zone, Jack and Liari were watched closely. They were given living quarters, food, and rest, but they were also asked to speak, to share what they saw, felt, and believed. At first, Jack hated it. He was a soldier, not a speaker. But when he saw Liari standing in front of a room full of alien children, smiling softly, telling them about the human who protected her, he knew why it mattered. Liari, too, was nervous. She had been raised to believe that humans were monsters. But now she stood beside one, slept beside one, and sometimes even laughed beside one. One day, they were invited to a joint assembly, the largest gathering of alien and human leaders since the war began. It was risky. Snipers watched the rooftops. Guards lined every path. Jack wore simple clothes, no armor, no weapon. Liari wore a silver sash, showing she came in peace. They walked hand in hand to the center of the great hall. Everyone stared, but no one spoke. Jack took a deep breath. He looked around the room and spoke with a steady voice. "I was taught to fight you," he said. "To fear you." He looked at Liari, but when I saw her bleeding, afraid, I didn't see an enemy. He let the silence sit. "I saw someone who needed help." Liari stepped forward, her voice soft but strong. "I was told humans had no hearts," she said, "but he gave me his, without asking for anything." There was a long pause. Then someone clapped, quiet but real. Another joined, then another, and soon the whole room echoed with applause. It wasn't just noise. It was the sound of walls breaking, of chains loosening, of minds opening in the weeks that followed. Something strange happened. Soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons more often. Mixed patrols began walking the border together. Even commanders who once refused to meet now shook hands in silence. Jack and Liari were no longer just survivors. They were symbols. Stories were written, songs sung, and flags raised, some with her blue hand, some with his brown hand, joined. In the middle, together, they became something rare in war. A reason to believe again late one night. After another long meeting, Jack and Lai sat under the stars. The war hadn't ended. Not yet, but it had slowed. And in that quiet, something new was growing. Liari leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still think it was worth the risk?" she asked. Jack smiled, eyes closed. "I'd take those blasts again," he whispered, 100 times. She didn't reply. Instead, she kissed his cheek and whispered back, "So would I." And somewhere, far away, in the place where history is written not by guns, but by hearts, their story had already begun.